about Gaza, Israel now, because we're sort of dealing with these two major conflicts in tandem, aren't we, across the world at the moment. We've got Ukraine, Russia, which is reaching ahead potentially this week with that meeting in Alaska on Friday. At the same time, of course, the conflict in Gaza, with the international community growing ever more concerned, if more concern were even possible at this stage, for the plight of both Gazan civilians and the lives of those hostages, Israeli hostages still taken by Hamas, and sort of one conflict seems to leapfrog the other day by day, but both of them, of course, are of utmost importance. And there were thousands of people protesting yesterday in Israel about the latest plans by Netanyahu to expand the occupation of Gaza by Israeli forces to include Gaza City. Jonathan Conricus is a former IDF spokesperson, and we're going to talk about this with him now. Morning to you, Jonathan.
Good morning. Thank
you for joining me.
My pleasure, thank you.
So let's talk a bit about the plans that were announced by Netanyahu this week. The Israeli public seem to think it's a bad idea on the basis of these protests yesterday and opinion polling. Apparently, figures within the military think it's a bad idea. The international community certainly thinks it's a bad idea. Why would Netanyahu want to do this other than to satisfy the fanatics in his own cabinet?
So the first thing is, I think we need to recognize that what's happening now is still, I believe, part of the negotiations between Israel and Hamas, the indirect negotiations. And I believe that what Israel is doing is trying to impress upon Hamas that if Hamas continues to refuse to hand over release hostages and continues to refuse to surrender and hand over their weapons, then this is what Israel can and eventually will do. I agree on the premise of your question that definitely the international so-called community doesn't want it to happen. Parts of Israeli society are not in favor, while other parts that are less represented in media are very much in favor of it. And I would say that most of the Israeli government is in favor of it. And I would also say that there's a lot of, logic in actually trying to win a war than just getting to a tie. To be clear, if the war ends as it is today, then sadly that will be a victory for Hamas. It means that they would have attacked Israel on October the 7th, and then through a series of actions and mistakes by Israel, eventually they will be able to get away with it. And I personally believe that that is not a good outcome. I agree, and I understand the concerns that many people have regarding the situation in Gaza, specifically the humanitarian situation, and of course, most importantly for me, what this would mean for Israeli hostages that are being kept, or 50 Israeli hostages that are kept by Hamas. So it's definitely a very complex situation, but I wouldn't put it in black and white colors as if everybody's against it and it's just extremists who want to do it. I see myself as a middle of the road kind of Israeli. I actually want us to defeat Hamas, and I don't want them to win.
Is it possible, though? Is it possible, Jonathan, to defeat Hamas? I mean, haven't we seen over the past 2 years that it just isn't possible? It depends what you see as Hamas. If you see Hamas as literally the human embodiment of Hamas on the ground and the number of humans who still wear fatigues and belong to the military operation of Hamas, then sure, maybe if you eliminate every single one of those, you've defeated Hamas. But Hamas is also an ideology. It's a belief system. And if anything, hasn't the past 2 years only inspired more people to subscribe to the extreme views of Hamas because of the way the Gazan people have been subjected to just the most horrendous humanitarian crisis?
Well, without belittling, I wouldn't call it the most horrendous humanitarian crisis. Hardship, definitely.
Well, what could be worse? What could be worse than what the Gaza people are going through?
I'm sorry, but really to put things into perspective, and I know that we are all up in emotions about what's going on in Gaza, but if you put it into perspective, there are far worse things that have happened in history and probably are happening today.
I think you'd struggle to find more than a handful of things that could be considered anywhere near worse than what's happening in Gaza right now. Starvation is one of the most painful ways to die.
Listen. without belittling what's happening in Gaza, I think that there is tremendous media bias and fixation with what's happening in this particular conflict. And sadly, the world is full of conflict and people that are suffering for various reasons.
This is one of the most acute conflicts.
Only they don't get the same level of attention.
The number of civilian casualties. The number of civilian casualties in this war, we're talking about something like 60,000 Palestinians now, according to the Hamas-run health ministry.
Are those civilian casualties? 60,000?
That's according to the Hamas-run health ministry.
No, even by Hamas standards, even by a lying terrorist organization, that number isn't civilian. That is the total alleged number of people that have died in Gaza, and that is, of course, not including and specifically saying how many of them were military combatants or terrorists. So when you say, and if you choose to take the numbers of a terrorist organization and give them the legality of truth, then I think at least you should say that the Hamas combatives are part of that alleged number. So otherwise, you'd be misleading people into thinking that 60,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza, when in fact it's Hamas and civilians included.
Okay, we can argue about the precise number, but you don't deny that tens of thousands of civilians have been killed in Gaza, surely. Even if the figure is 30,000 or 20,000, tens of thousands of Gazan civilians have died in Gaza.
As a result of the war that Hamas started, yes, they have indeed been killed.
Okay, so then why do you dispute that this is one of the most acute conflicts anywhere in the world? Why is it media biased to be focused on that humanitarian plight?
How many times have you covered what's happening in Sueda in western Syria? Do you know that there's a siege on that area today and that around 200,000 Syrian Druze are cut off from the rest of supply of water, food, electricity? Do you know that their hospital has run out of everything and that people are dying there? Do you know that the Syrian authorities are cutting them off and refusing any aid to be let in? That's an acute humanitarian situation on the ground that, because Israel isn't directly involved and because it's not Palestinians, is getting absolutely, maybe not zero, but maybe 1% of the attention. Again, I'm not being cynical here. I'm saying that, yes, people in Gaza are suffering, but I'm saying that the amount of attention that this conflict is getting and the almost automatic knee-jerk response that this gets from international media, it kind of put things out of perspective here a little bit. Yes, they're suffering in Gaza. What's the result of the suffering? The fact that they launched a war against Israel, the fact that they have Israeli hostages and that they refuse to let them up.
We're going over arguments that have been well rehearsed, but I would just put to you, Jonathan, that it wasn't the civilians, it wasn't children who were starving now that launched the war. It was Hamas.
Well, actually, it was civilians. If you want to make a point,
children did not choose to start this war.
No, children did it. That I can agree.
And children are dying.
And if you're willing to go as far...
Children are dying,
yes,
and they don't deserve to die.
But the responsibility for those children dying is with the people who launched the war. And it's with their parents who supported Hamas. And I think we should be honest in recognizing that.
There hasn't been an election in Gaza for a decade or so.
Right, but the last time that they were, who was elected and who has continuously been supporting the Hamas government according to
they deserve their suffering, polls. Do they? They deserve it, do they?
No, but I don't think that women, children, and elderly. No, I'd appreciate if you wouldn't, put words in my mouth. I'm perfectly capable of saying things myself. Okay. I'm saying that what you are taking away from Palestinians in Gaza is agency and responsibility for their action and their choices. And I'm saying that the way that you and many others
I don't think we apply that standard to anyone else around the world. I don't think in any other conflict. I don't think in any other conflict. So, for example, in Syria, when there was civil war there, we didn't say, well, it's all their own fault because originally they did elect a dictator as their president who went on to rule with an iron fist. I don't think we hold civilians to that level of responsibility anywhere else in the world.
First of all, a civil war is different than a war between a state actor and a non-state actor. Here we're talking about Hamas that attacked Israel, and Israel is now fighting against Hamas. That's a different thing when you hold people accountable for the choices. And what I think is desperately missing from the conversation about what's going on in Gaza is, yes, how many people in Gaza supported Hamas? What were the sentiments in Gaza?
I think people who have been born since that election, almost a decade ago, since they last had proper elections in
It's not only about the elections,
Gaza.
and if you would allow me to finish
I
the
don't think children who've been born since
which
then
you obviously
deserve to
don't
be
want to.
suffering. You've spoken a lot, Jonathan. Let's not misrepresent our interview here. You have spoken a lot, but I find it difficult
with a lot of interruptions. Yes.
Okay, some interruptions because it is a two-way conversation. I think most people listening would disagree with you when you say that children, in some way, suffer because is some way justified. Their suffering is some way justified because of the political choices of their parents.
No, I have not even come close to using that word, and I would again ask you professionally to represent. Don't try to paraphrase me. What I'm saying is that Hamas was the one who started this war. Hamas is accountable for the suffering in Gaza, and what Israel is doing is responding to Hamas's attack. Now, what I can agree with you 100% is that, unfortunately, Israel has still failed to achieve its objectives of defending itself and defeating Hamas. And a difference that I would like to impress upon you is that the fact that Hamas is also an ideology doesn't mean that you shouldn't fight it. ISIS is an ideology, but last time I checked, the UK sent forces halfway around the world in order to fight the physical embodiment of that ideology, as it was in Syria and Iraq. And once they were military defeated, the UK forces went back home. It's a similar situation, only the difference here for Israel is that our civilians are in the line of fire. And if we don't deal with the threat, then the next time of the next October 7 attack, or however they will try to do it, is just a matter of time. And when people speak about the future of Gaza and will Israel take Gaza City or control, or all of the other word mincing that we're seeing now, that isn't really the point, is it? It's about either you want to live in security in your country and for people and children in Israel to be able to live safely in their homes, or you don't. If you don't, then it's okay that Hamas stays in power and we can speak about civilian suffering in Gaza and orphans and children and every other talking point that I've heard hurled at me for 2 and 3 and 5 years. But from an Israeli perspective, this is about Israelis being able to live in their homes. And since October 7, they have not been able to. And I, frankly, as an Israeli, would want for that to be reality. Now, I understand that there's hardship in Gaza, and I don't want women, children, and elderly who were not part of the fighting to suffer. But the responsibility here, and so many times that's shifted on Israel, the responsibility is on Hamas. They started the war. They could have ended it a long time ago. They hold on to our hostages. They are using the Palestinians as their human shields, and I think that is missing from coverage.
I don't think that is missing from coverage. I think there's been a lot of coverage of the part Hamas have played. Certainly, October the 7th, there was international condemnation. All of the media, in the UK at least, from what I saw, were absolutely clear in their condemnation of the actions of Hamas. The point that I pick up with you is whether civilians deserve to be suffering. And I don't really understand why you've raised this point about the fact that Hamas were elected, unless you are in some way suggesting that those civilians are responsible.
What I'm saying is that the civilians in Gaza bear the consequences of Hamas. And what Hamas did on October 7th and has been doing since, and again, I know this is an unpopular point of view, but on October the 7th, about 2,000 Hamas operatives invaded into Israel and murdered and raped and burned and pillaged. And then 3,000 Palestinian civilians came into Israel and performed all kinds of atrocities in Israel. And these were run-of-the-mill, ordinary men, young men, children, and I even saw a few pictures of women, not elderly, but I saw pictures of women coming into Israel. And when they dragged Israeli hostages back into Gaza, again, you may not want me to dwell on this, but the joy, jubilation, and public excitement of Israeli hostages being drawn into Gaza was very, very vivid. Israeli hostages have been held by Palestinian civilians in their civilian homes. They have been jailed by civilians.
Jonathan,
so you cannot tell me...
We've got to wrap it up. We've got to wrap it up, but I appreciate your time this morning. And look, this is a topic that people feel very strongly about. That was Jonathan Conricus, their former IDF spokesperson. Lots of you texting in, some of you saying Jonathan's absolutely wrong, others saying, how dare I even question him on it. This is always a topic, whenever we do it on LBC, that elicits very strong reaction.